We tend to think of intimacy as something private, something that happens behind closed doors. We whisper sweet nothings into our lover's ears when we think no one is listening. But what if someone was always listening? What if your bedroom walls had ears and eyes? Medieval people did not have the luxury of privacy. Privacy in medieval Europe was reserved for the nobility, but for most people, their homes were constantly filled with visitors and eavesdroppers. So how did they manage to have any kind of intimate relationship at all? Most people lived in villages where everyone's houses were close together and everyone knew each other. Some people say that this is why mothers always know when their kids are dating someone special because they learn it from experience. The main reason for this tradition was to make sure that the bride was a virgin before the wedding. She wasn't, her mother would know and would take care of the situation. Another reason for the mother to move in was to protect the woman from rape. Lying around that wealthy people had to have someone stand guard over them at all times. Metal spikes could also be attached to the curtain rods to discourage anyone from trying to climb through. The bed itself might be surrounded by a wooden or metal cage for extra protection. That sounds pretty scary, but people really had no other choice. They kept their valuables in large chests that were locked up during the day and only opened at night. Pull our blinds and bolt our windows to ensure that our personal moments remain private. But things were very different during the Middle Ages. Spare a thought for the people who lived in a world without it. Would you be able to maintain your privacy if your house had no doors or walls? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for watching. The threat of violence, burglary, and gossip made it necessary for people to take extreme measures to protect themselves and their loved ones. From reinforced bed curtains to tear-infused medicines, the medieval world was a strange and fascinating place where intimacy truly was a luxury. A servant would stay awake and keep watch over the treasure chest, while the rest of the family slept, and that was just for material possessions. It was just as important to protect yourself from harm. Fortunately, rape was fairly common during medieval times, and women needed all the help they could get. Finally, there were some instances where a woman would fake her own virginity. Crying was seen as a sign of weakness during medieval times, and people would be mocked if they were caught shedding tears. And those tears were highly valued. Apothecaries believed that these tears could help heal wounds. Sometimes people would cry together. A group of women would gather in a room and cry together for an upcoming wedding or other happy occasion. This way, the tears would be ready to go when they were needed. This tradition is still practiced in some parts of the world today. Since crying was forbidden, people would often do it at night in secret. But there were people who made money from other people's tears. They were called ganamakers. Ganamakers would take advantage of women who cried in public. They would come up to them and offer to buy their tears for a price. These tears were then sold to apothecaries, who used them in their products. The apothecaries sold these tear-infused products to men who believed they could help cure eye problems like cataracts. There was even a machine invented during the Middle Ages that allowed multiple women to cry into a funnel simultaneously. This way, the apothecaries could collect lots of fresh tears for their customers. Since she would be blamed for the pregnancy if she was not a virgin, by sleeping with her daughter, the mother was essentially inoculating her against future accusations. So you see, the mother's presence wasn't that bad for the bride. Also, this tradition died out in areas where there was more privacy. Other people say that this is why mothers will tell you that you do and want to get married. Tapestries and other types of wall hangings were mainly used to keep out the drafts and the cold. Rival families would hire assassins to sneak into their victims' rooms at night and deliver poison. The poison would be disguised as medicine or food, and the victim would be none the wiser until it was too late. Assassinations weren't uncommon either, especially during the reign of the Borgia family in Renaissance Italy. One of the most famous poisons used during this time was stramonium, or devil's snare. It was a hallucinogen that could easily be slipped into food or drink and would cause its victim to see horrifying visions before going insane and dying. Medieval assassins would also use a wickedly sharp dagger, called a poniard, to stab their victims in the dark and escape undetected. Poison and daggers aside, burglars were also a problem during medieval times. But people did sometimes use them for a bit of decoration. They would also use furniture to hide nooks and crannies. For example, the four-poster bed became popular in medieval times. It had curtains that could be drawn for more privacy. It's likely that the rich had separate bedrooms while servants shared rooms and slept in the same beds. But the lack of privacy wasn't just annoying. It could actually put you in danger. If the bride had any say in the matter, she would probably agree with her mother. As you may have guessed, this tradition didn't exactly have the best reputation. The houses might have been separated by a thin wooden fence or just a hedge, and people's yards were shared. It was common throughout Europe until the 18th century. The bride's mother would sleep in the same bed as her daughter and the groom. She would take care of the bride until she got used to sexual intercourse. She would also instruct her daughter on how to please her husband and make sure that the wedding night went smoothly. The mother would then move to another room and allow the newlyweds to spend their first anniversary alone together. In these circumstances, having a secret was nearly impossible. Gossiping was also a favorite pastime of medieval people, which meant that even more information was spread around town about every little thing that happened between closed doors. Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out how intimacy worked in medieval times. Without privacy, medieval life behind closed door. During medieval times, only the elite could afford to live in relative solitude. So it would seem that privacy was at a premium, and sex was a very public event. During medieval times, people were married off at a young age, often before puberty. Courtship was rare because most marriages were arranged to strengthen alliances between families, not based on love. You can watch our other video about weird medieval marriage traditions. Here, after saying yes to the proposal, the couple would be married immediately and expected to consummate the marriage right away. Often the bride would need help from her mother or a maid during the wedding night, since she had probably never had sex before. Believe it or not, this would happen in front of guests. In some cases, the bride's mother would share her daughter's bed for several nights after the wedding. This custom was called the droit de cuisage. This custom has understandably been the subject of many jokes and memes. But there were practical reasons for this strange custom. One drawback of not having privacy is that you couldn't really hang decorations in your house. It was very common for members of the nobility to be poisoned during medieval times. In fact, it was so dangerous to leave your valuables bed, curtains were often reinforced with thick fabric to make them harder to cut through.
Another disadvantage of not having any privacy is that you couldn't cry in private.
The good news is that the tears could be saved for future use by boiling them and turning them into a powder. People also shed tears of joy. Privacy is something that we take for granted in our modern society. We lock our doors, so the next time you find yourself enjoying a moment of privacy,